Welcome to the Radical Lifestyle Podcast, brought to you by Generation to Generation, where you will be inspired by the past, equipped for the present, and prepared for the future as we engage in conversations with people from around the world. Hi everyone, this is Andrew from Generation to Generation. Normally, with our Radical Lifestyle Podcast, we have guests on and we have conversations, but we held a gathering for our Issachar Network, and the message that was shared was so powerful and life-changing that we thought it was important to release that through Radical Lifestyle Podcast for everyone to be able to get the chance to hear it. The speaker was Andrew Brunson, and he's been on our podcast before, so I'll put the link to that in the description box. If you're interested to hear his previous episode, you can go and listen to that. He was held in prison in Turkey for 2 years. And so he came, spoke to our Issachar Network about things that he'd learned through that experience and how it can help us as we prepare for the future and things that we all may have to go through. You know, our Issachar Network, for those people that are interested, I'll put a link in the description as well. Our Issachar Network is for people that are really wanting to understand the times that we're living in right now and how we can better prepare for the years that are ahead of us. It's for all ages. And again, if you're interested, the link will be in the description, but we just thought it was important to release this message through Radical Lifestyle Podcast. It's not a conversation, but we still thought it was valuable and important and something that everyone should really get the opportunity to hear. So coming up now is Andrew Brunson.
So I take it from the name Issachar that you are people who are discerning the times. And I just want to mention a couple of things. I was part of a gathering early February, bringing together some leaders from Asia and Middle East, and just for prayer and discerning what God is doing. And there was an emphasis on shutting the door to the enemy who wants to instigate a wider war that would prematurely cut off the harvest, and specifically Russia and anything from China coming up very quickly that could be a regional war that would end up spreading. And I'm not an intercessor. I like to hang out with intercessors. I'm not especially prophetic. I like to hang out with prophetic people so they can tell me what I'm supposed to do, and then I go out and do it. Just the discernment was that this was something coming up. This was early February, and of course now we have this war in Ukraine with Russia. And just as you pray that this will be stopped from spreading, because I think there's a plan of the enemy, a satanic plan to spread this and prematurely cut off some things that God wants to do. So I'm going to talk about prison experience and some of those things in just a minute, but I especially have a sense and an urgency in the last since I was released from prison for the West. I realize that people on this call are coming from a number of countries, but when I speak in the West, generally it's with this urgency that we are to prepare for difficult times, more specifically for a wave of hostility that's about to crash onto the church, and that most people are not ready for. Now, I realize people, in Malaysia and Indonesia, I see some people from those areas. You already have been dealing with this kind of hostility for a long time, and are prepared in a different way than Western believers are. But there are a couple of things that are setting the context, I think, for this time of increasing hostility to believers. And I think that we've seen a real acceleration just in the last couple of years of the conditions being created for there to be this hostility, and to be able to apply it to people in ways that will really challenge them. And so one of those is during COVID, we just see a tremendous grab for control by governments. And just even as I traveled, Noreen and I traveled in this just in February over in Europe. In a lot of places, you have to have a QR code. We go into Belgium, we have to fill out a paper, forms, and it gives us a QR code. You cannot get into the country without that. Same thing in Greece. They're scanning our QR code that each of us carries as we come into the country. In France, you could not go into a restaurant or ride public transport, even with the vaccination from the United States. You had to have a French QR code that they generate to be able to do anything in the country. So whatever you think of COVID and all of that, that's not really the point. The point is that there's been just a move we saw where a lot more control can be asserted, can be applied in countries where you would not expect that. We know in some authoritarian countries already have this kind of surveillance system and in place, but this very quickly spread in places where we expected there to be more freedom. And this can very quickly be used for other purposes. I'm also looking at what's happened in Russia and Ukraine now, and how Russia has very quickly been cut off from the financial systems. So cutting off from SWIFT, which means that Russians who were overseas, suddenly they can't access their bank, they can't use their credit cards, Visa, MasterCard pull out. Russian banks are cut off completely, not completely, but almost completely from international markets and relationships. You see the sanctions applied very quickly, but then a lot of corporations and businesses who pulled out themselves and far beyond what sanctions required. And you just see a willingness on the part of businesses, which is unusual now, to actually lose money in order to take a stand, what they consider a moral stand right now. And so, and then also the move toward a digital currency. I don't know if you picked up on that, but in the United States, this is President Biden recently ordered that they begin to plan for that. Whether it will be instituted right away, I don't know. But I have a friend who works very high in the world of finance, who is meeting with governments around the world, trying to get them to adopt a digital currency system that his company is preparing to counter the digital currency system that China is putting into place. And so my point is, this is something that's coming. And as that is instituted, it means that there's complete control by government over finances. And so I look at what's being done, and it's being done very quickly in unison against people who are evil and hateful. That's how Russians are perceived right now. Certainly Putin is that, but it's to all Russians, being applied to all Russians. They're suddenly a hated people. And the reason I bring this up isn't to talk about Ukraine or Russia. It's that what we're seeing happen there is going to be applied to faithful followers of Jesus. All of the things that we're seeing applied now, how very quickly people can be cut off from the financial system, the coming digital currencies, the corporations and businesses who take a moral stand and say, these people are evil and hateful, what they're doing is terrible, and we must oppose them. and we will do this even if we lose money. All of these things will be applied to faithful followers of Jesus. And in February, Noreen and I went to Finland to deliver a pledge that over 14,000 people had signed to pray for someone named Päivi Räsänen. And she is a Finnish member of parliament, member of the Finnish parliament, well-known political figure in their country, who is on trial because of her public comments about LGBT, about not attacking homosexuality at all, but saying this is a biblical standard, what the Bible says, and tweeting from Romans 1, what the biblical standard is. And she's actually on trial, criminal trial, because of her views. And she is being presented as a hate figure. Now, I think what's coming in many places, we're already seeing in parts of the world, but is coming in the West, is that followers of Jesus who are faithful to his teaching and to basically the two wedge issues, the exclusivity of Jesus in salvation, that he's the only way to salvation, to God. And secondly, that he demands obedience from his followers in a number of issues that are contested in culture nowadays, like issues of sexual morality and gender identity and life and biblical justice and a number of areas that we will be seen actually as a people who are hateful. And this is obviously not true, but we have to remember that Jesus himself was, although he was the most loving person in history, was called demonic and evil. And if they did this to him, then why wouldn't they do it to us? And I think what really, obviously this is spiritually driven, but people are reacting to us because we carry the scent of Jesus. When we're walking with him, we carry his scent. It just exudes from us. And so there's a reaction to Jesus in us, to his truth, because it's a clash of kingdoms, darkness against light. And so this is just kind of, I'm not trying to talk about current events and highlight these so much as to say this is what's coming. And I think that many of we will be seen as evil and intolerant and hateful and carrying a message of hate, even though we carry a message of love and reconciliation with God. But that is not how it will be portrayed. And the response to this, we will see people being cut off from financial systems. We will see tremendous social pressure applied. What is applied to people in the West now who are considered evil. And there's something we need to prepare ourselves for. I don't want to bring an atmosphere of gloom and doom. That's not at all what I'm about. I'm not defeatist, but I think we need to be sober-minded. And as I said, for some of you on this call who are, in Indonesia, Malaysia, other countries where believers have faced pressure, this is just a normal thing. But for many people in the West, I think that many believers in the West are just not ready. We don't think that it can happen. Or I've also seen a overconfidence. And maybe that's maybe an American trait in our culture, being very confident and optimistic about things. That bring on the persecution, because look what's happened in China. The church has just grown. And it's true that God has done an amazing work in China in where the church has really been under a lot of pressure. But for every place like China, I can show you another place where the voice of the church has been silenced. And if you look at history, the church was so many believers in North Africa, the Middle East, Central Asia, all the way to China. Just so many believers. And then Islam came, and just the pressure over time from Islam, you don't really see a church in many of those places anymore. So I think we need to be sober-minded. It's not to be, as I said, defeatist and just dark, but to be aware that there is an enemy, that this pressure is going to come. And I think a lot in terms of assignment. Sarah quoted from the song that it was my heart song in prison. And it's a line that was very important to me. I want to be found worthy to stand before you on that day with no regrets from cowardice, things left undone. And this was a real turning point for me. I wrote that song. I didn't sit down to write a song. I was simply singing out my grief, actually, to God, because I had just found out that the Turkish government wanted 3 life sentences for me in solitary confinement with no possibility of parole. And so this was just like a death sentence. And I thought, I don't know if I'll ever see my kids again, ever be, with my wife again in freedom. And this was very heavy for me. And I just began to sing out my grief as I paced back and forth. And then what came out of my mouth, out of my heart, was basically, "You're worthy. You're worthy of my all. You're worthy of whatever pain and suffering I may go through. You're worthy of this." And then that very important line that I just mentioned. That went back a few months previously. I had, and I don't know what I shared on the last podcast. I have no idea. So I'm just telling the story again, if you've heard it already. A few months before, I had, at a very low point, I had said to God, "I don't want to serve you anymore. I still believe in you. I still love you, Jesus, but I don't want to serve you anymore." And at that time, I'd already been 23 years in Turkey, and then 6 months in prison at that time. So I was well into the 24th year and of service in Turkey. And I said, whatever assignments you have for me, I don't want them anymore. I can't handle this. The only thing I want from you is for you to release me and let me go back to my family. I'm so broken. I can't handle this. Let me go. Just let me go. If you have assignments for me, if you intend to use this imprisonment, if you want to use me in prison, I'm not really available. I don't want to do it. I can't. My heart cannot handle this anymore. And basically renouncing my inheritance. An inheritance of serving him. And it was a very low point to say, "I don't want to serve you anymore, God." And here I was under more difficult circumstances several months later, where now it's 3 life sentences. And my reaction now is, I want to be found worthy to stand before you on that day with no regrets from cowardice, from things left undone. And it came from seeing, just in my mind, standing before Jesus at the end of my life and having him say to me, "Andrew, there were assignments I had for you you did not complete because you were a coward. There was an inheritance I intended for you to gain in this life, and you didn't because you ran away." And somehow the grace of God, he put it into my heart and I just dwelt on standing before Jesus at the end of my life and having regrets. And I don't think we will be full of regret in heaven, but I think we will be aware of things that we didn't do that we were supposed to, of inheritances that we did lose, and we will be, full of joy and peace. But I think we will be aware, and I began to just press into that. God, I don't want to stand before you with those regrets. I don't want to come before you in that way. And there was just that turnaround, beginning to focus on living for the day I stand before Jesus. And this began to focus me on heaven. It began to give me a different. I think you have to build a perspective of fear of God, and this is one of the areas that when we are afraid, we're much more likely to run away. And that's a normal reaction when we have fear, when we have a threat, something that can harm us. It just naturally, we're afraid, and the instinct is to run away. And I can't avoid that surge of adrenaline, the fear that comes when there's a threat. But we prepare ourselves ahead of time so that when we are afraid, we don't run, but stand. I've heard Mike Bickle, the leader of IHOP in Kansas City, say, we prepare ahead of time so that we're not afraid. And I said to him, Mike, I said, maybe that's true for you. So I can imagine that Mike will not be afraid. But I said, for me, I prepare ahead of time so that when I am afraid, I don't run, but stand, because I have been afraid many times, and I had to build a fear of God. I thought I had that already. I thought I was already a pretty tough missionary. I think we'd had death threats, and I'd been attacked by a gunman and shot at once. And just these are some of the kinds of things you deal with if you have a public ministry in Turkey. And if someone had said to me before I was put in prison, Andrew, you're going to spend time in a Turkish prison, I would have been afraid. But I also realistically, knowing myself, I would have had a sense of bravado, which is kind of a overconfidence. Like, it's going to be okay. I have so many of my heroes have suffered for the Lord, and they didn't really struggle. And so, it's going to be all right. And I remember someone sending me a message with Noreen, tell Andrew, it's just you and God now. It's just you and God. It's going to be great. And it wasn't. It was just God and me, but it wasn't great. There's some very good things that came out of it, but it was really hard, and I broke, and I was really surprised that I broke so quickly in prison. But I'm trying to remember to link this back to fear of God. I was in solitary confinement. Noreen had been released after 2 weeks, and then they transferred me to a detention center, put me into just on my own. And that was really difficult for me. And that's when I began to break with just all the adrenaline, all the stress hormones that were released with the fear, and that kept me from sleeping. So I just sleep deprivation, and also the isolation. It was just me and a bed. There was nothing to read, no writing materials, no one to talk to except guards, and just being aware suddenly that there's a very powerful spirit, the Ottoman Spirit, that has got a hold of me and wants to destroy me. But the Ottoman Spirit, by the way, just Turkey was the head of the Muslim world for centuries and conquered many peoples in the name of Islam and imposed Islam and suffocated Christianity. So very powerful antichrist spirit there. And I now knew that that spirit had targeted me and was attacking me, and is very powerful and could easily destroy me. And just that fear, the isolation began to break me down. And there was in the early days of that solitary confinement, I'm beginning to lose my mind. I just sit around with nothing to do, no one to talk to. It's very, very difficult, and all the uncertainty. And a guard who didn't know that I was being treated as a high security detainee allowed someone from the House of Prayer, brought Mike Bickle's booklet on prayers to strengthen, I can't remember the name of it, to strengthen the heart, something like that. And just a little booklet with 10 prayers. And it got through to me. They let it through by mistake. And the first one is fear of God. And I began to just press into developing fear of God. This little booklet helped me to structure my day just around prayer. It gave me something to do, and just a structure that kept me sane. And one of them, the first one, pressing into fear of God. And one of the things that I have friends who've met with Jesus or who've had heavenly experiences. And I thought, God, I really need this now. And I thought about Paul, he says, this momentary light affliction cannot compare with the glory that, is going to be revealed, that we're going to experience in the future. We focus on what is unseen, not on what is seen. And I thought Paul was able to do that, but Paul also, had experience. He met the resurrected Jesus in all of his glory, and such a powerful experience, and knocked him down. And then he also went to heaven. And he had a heavenly experience. He saw things that he was not allowed to tell us. And so he actually had a view from heaven. He could look at and say, the things that were, the struggles, the suffering I have now doesn't compare. It really, really doesn't. It's so short compared to eternity. But he wasn't saying that in faith. He was saying that from experience, actually. He had seen it and experienced it. And I just thought, oh God, if only you would give me that. Let me go to heaven for 1 minute. Or Jesus, will you appear in my cell and let me see your glory? That I'm sure that will just change my way of thinking. And I begged for this because I was so desperate. I was broken. I needed that. But he didn't give it to me. He didn't give it to me. And instead, I had to build it. I had to build it day after day. God says, I'll put my fear in their heart so they do not depart from me. And just praying, oh God, put your fear in my heart so that I have a different mentality and a different perspective. And so you can build this. And I built it little by little, day after day, until I got to that point where I could say, I'm living for the day that I stand before Jesus, and began to have that different perspective, a perspective of more dominated by eternity. And that's something that you can build. I think I'm going all over the place. I'm just saying what comes into my mind. But so I mentioned breaking, and my conditions broke me. They led to my breaking. The isolation, the fear. After solitary confinement, I was put into a high security prison, very crowded cell, built for 8 people. There were 22 of us there, all very, very strong Muslims. It was like being at IHOP, but a Muslim IHOP, because everyone was really desperate to get out, and they thought the way to do that was to do more Islamic prayers and chanting and things of the Quran. So it was a very intense spiritual environment. And I was very isolated in my faith. I was the only believer, as I said, a follower of Jesus. And so, but what really broke me, I broke physically, emotionally, all those things would have happened anyway. But what took me into crisis with God was losing the sense of his presence. And it's something I'd run after for years. I think actually that charismatics are going to have a more difficult time in times of persecution than because of our heightened expectation. Those who have had encounters with God, who pursued presence, who have experienced the presence of God. I'll just say my expectations were heightened because of my experiences with God. And so I assumed that when I'm in prison, I'm going to have that same sense of God's presence, and even stronger because I'm suffering for Jesus, and I need it more because I'm in crisis. And so I was very surprised and hurt. I was deeply wounded in my heart when the one I've pursued for so many years and just focused on intimacy and drawn close to, and on presence especially, we're very presence focused in all of our ministry, that I lost all sense of his presence. And it was 2 years of experiencing the silence of God. Now, since getting out of prison, I've learned that many people who have been in a situation like I have, Chinese or North Korean or Iranian believers, have had a similar experience to mine. That, we hear the prison stories of people who, have Jesus appear to them, or angels, or all these kinds of things. And that does happen for some. But for most of them, they don't have that. And many of them have this sense of being abandoned by God, at least for a time. I don't know why that is, but somehow God allows it, and he allows that breaking. So I became offended toward God in my heart. It came from a deep wounding. Where are you, my Father? I've been teaching on the Father heart of God. Where is my gentle, kind Father? And how could you abandon me in this when I'm suffering for you? And this led to accusations against God, questioning his faithfulness, goodness, love, truth, and just becoming hardened in my heart toward him. And I mention that because with the times we're going into, Jesus said the love of many will grow cold, and that's specifically in relation to becoming offended toward him because of the judgments that he brings. And I say we as God's people are not under judgment, but we are embedded among peoples who are under judgment. And so we will live through many difficulties with them as they come under judgment of God. And often that judgment is intended to bring people to repentance, but nevertheless, it's difficult. Also, believers will be offended, Jesus said, by the amount of the degree of sin that God allows and the terrible suffering that comes with it. You just look at what's happening in Ukraine. That's a sin. And also by the suffering that he allows from persecution. And how difficult this can be. God, how could you let this happen to me? I'm your son. I've been pursuing you. And there will be this context that we're coming into of judgments, of increase of sin and darkness, and of persecution is one where believers, Jesus said, I'm not saying it, he said that the love of many will grow cold. And so what I experienced in prison, I think is meant to be a warning. I was a strong believer. I'd been planting churches, serving God for many years. And yet my heart, just became suffocated in my relationship with God because of that, of the wounded heart. And so it's a warning. Be careful of the wounded heart, of disappointment in God, because I think we will be disappointed. Most people go into some crisis in their life where they don't have a sense of God's presence and feel abandoned by him. And we need to just be very careful to guard that the disappointment not turn into accusation, which will then suffocate our relationship with God. So there's a danger of the offended heart. And the first year I would characterize in prison as the breaking, and the second year, the rebuilding. And the rebuilding's really, the turning point for that came when I made a decision with my will, not with my emotions, but with my will. I'm going to set aside the conditions that I've placed on God. This is how I expect you to show your love to me. This is what your faithfulness means in my life. It means you doing this or that for me. My trust in God. I realized so often the trust is related to an outcome. We tie it to an outcome. And what I mean by that is people would say to me, send me messages, Andrew, just trust God. And the message is he's gonna rescue you from this. Well, there's no guarantee for that. I think when we come into persecution, that the promise God sometimes suspends temporarily the promises he's made for provision and protection and for health. And because of the context of persecution. So there's no guarantee what's going to happen. So people are saying, trust God, but they're really kind of saying, trust God for what he will do. And I know we're supposed to trust the person and not the outcome, but it's very hard in my heart and in my mind to separate the two. And so what does trusting God mean in that kind of situation? So I had to remove the conditions that I placed on God and say, whatever you do or don't do, I'm going to follow you. If you don't give me your presence, I'll still follow you. If you don't give me your voice, I'll still follow you. If you don't give me grace, now I had grace, but I didn't feel it. I felt like I was, barely keeping my head above water, struggling. So grace was not what I had expected. But I'm saying, if you don't give me that sense of grace or strength, I'm still going to follow you. If you never release me from here, I will still follow you. I'm setting aside those conditions. And I'll also mention just a very practical thing, was imagining a lockbox and visualizing, putting into that lockbox my doubts and questions and accusations, and then locking it very securely in my mind, just going through, visualizing this, and then saying, God, you and I are the only ones who can open this box, and you can open it any time if you want to deal with my issues. But I make the decision with my will. I am not going to open this box. I'm not going to allow these questions and doubts a place in my mind. I won't entertain them any longer. And the key, I don't need to have answers to have a relationship with you. So giving up a right, we don't have a right, but giving up that, in a sense, almost as a son, I expect God to answer. but giving up my right to question and just saying, I'm not going to question anymore. I'm just simply putting my eyes on you. I choose to fix my eyes on you in the darkness, in my confusion, in your silence. I choose to fix my eyes on you. And that was a decision I made again and again, to turn my eyes toward him and not away. And I say sometimes in my weakness, I could just barely turn in his direction, maybe 1 degree. But that 1 degree makes all the difference. And again, I had to make that choice in dark times. I choose to turn to you. I choose to put my eyes on you. And I choose not to turn away. I will not turn away. I turn toward you. And that positioned me so that, after I put my doubts and questions in that box, I still had doubts and questions come, but I'd send them to that box again, focusing in on surrender to serving God's purposes day after day. God still didn't give me a sense of his presence. Okay, Andrew, you learned your lesson. You put your eyes on me in difficult times. No, it didn't change. I still had no sense of God's presence, but there was something that began to build in me. And so I want to underline the importance of dealing with the offended heart, of coming to that point where I say, I don't need answers to have a relationship with you. Because I think everyone on this call has gone through or will go through a time like that, where you don't have a sense of God's presence in a time of crisis. And that will test your heart. And it will, I often say, we have different people start telling me about one of their crises they're going through or some problem, and then they kind of stop and say, well, it doesn't compare to what you went through, Andrew. And I say, no. My tests were enough to knock me out of friendship with God, and your tests are enough to knock you out of friendship with God. The truth is we're tested in different ways, but the area of the heart that is tested, the areas are the same. I was with my son, my youngest son. He's in the military. He was his dream was to get to be in a very elite program in the military, and he was in it. He was in their training program, and he had an injury, and it knocked him out, and from his dream. And as he processes this, the questions, the doubts, I said, Blaze, you're asking the same things, and you have the same issues that I had in prison. Very different context, but the area of the heart that's tested is the same. And there, the question is, I came to realize that I had all these questions for God, but he had questions for me. Andrew, are you going to love me even when you don't see my love? Are you going to be faithful even when you don't see my faithfulness? And the truth is that there are things that we're not going to understand. I think of there are actually a number of believers who break in prison or break under tremendous pressure, and they don't come out victorious. Praise God, I came out victorious. That was, God's grace. He shepherded my heart through this. He brought me through, and he rebuilt me. But there are people who don't come out rebuilt. They just come out broken. And something that really struck me reading Richard Wurmbrand, who was a Romanian pastor who was in prison for 14 years in communist Romania and suffered terribly. There were people he was in prison with who went insane, believers who were there because of their faith. And I think the first reaction that many believers have is, wait, that doesn't sound right. Didn't Jesus say to Paul, my grace is sufficient for you, for my strength is made perfect in weakness. Wait, what about I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me? The idea that your grace would not be sufficient to keep me from going insane. Now, this was very real to me because I tasted of insanity in prison. I tasted of it, and I would pull back, and I was afraid that sometime I would not be able to pull back across that barrier. The thing is, God's grace is sufficient to keep us from going insane. But he didn't give it to them in sufficient quantity. He just didn't give it to them. He could have, but he didn't. And the way Richard Wurmbrand dealt with this, how does that fit in your theology of suffering? I don't know. But the way that Wurmbrand dealt with this, he said, is their insanity was beautiful to God. And it was, because they went insane because of their faithfulness to Jesus. It was a consequence of suffering for him. And it's been made right in heaven. I know that they carry an honor, and we will meet them someday, and you just know, but this person lost his mind for Jesus, went insane for Jesus. What a sacrifice. What a beautiful sacrifice. So they'll carry that honor for eternity. But it wasn't made right in this life. And so I think there's just a difficult thing to deal with, that we're human, we break, and God allows it. And I don't understand it. But what I do say to people now when they're suffering is, I don't have answers for you. Why? I don't understand it completely myself, but I can tell you what you need to do. And the response is, you cannot allow offense to take hold in your heart. There has to be a surrendering and a leaning into Jesus and a decision. I will put my eyes on you no matter what. In my weakness and my defeats and my confusion and the darkness, I insist, I am determined that I will put my eyes on you and not turn away from you. I don't know how much time I have. I want to mention one other thing, which is the need to build perseverance. And I was receiving prophetic ministry years ago, and this person said to me, it's been very accurate with me over the years, just in the middle of prophetic stream, Andrew, you'll be known for perseverance. And I thought, oh no, I would like to be known for miracles or for bringing the presence of God or for something else, not perseverance. Oh no, this was years ago. And before I needed that perseverance. But I thought that wasn't a comforting word, because persevering means difficulty. It's enduring, being steadfast through difficulty. And I did not want to be known for that. But as I broke in prison, I remembered that, and I thought, oh God, I want to embrace this, and I need this to be built in me. Somebody sent me a word, a prophetic guy, and I was eagerly waiting for this word, because it was early on, and I wanted to hear something that would encourage me. God's going to rescue me, whatever, something like that. And this man sent the word, tell Andrew, God says, all the times he has stood are for now. That was not encouraging, because what he was saying is, and I thought about this a great deal, what does this mean? It means that every time there was a hardship and I endured and was faithful and put into practice the spiritual disciplines and turning my eyes on Jesus and being faithful to him and loving him through, every time that I pressed on in a difficulty, it built something in me that was preparing me for this great difficulty right now. All of the faithfulness over the years in times of difficulty was preparing me for this one big thing, which meant that this was not going to end very soon, and that it would be very difficult and would require everything that had been built up. But there was something very important in that, is that we need to build a mentality of perseverance. And another thing, somebody sent me prophetic word. It was just from the Bible, but sent me a verse from Jeremiah, where God, Jeremiah is complaining. Says, God, why are you treating me so bad? Why are you so much hard on me? And look at everyone else. You're really harsh toward me. And at the time I was really struggling with that. I was thinking, God, you're just being really rough on me, because you're trying to, you want a bulletproof soldier, basically, is my mentality. You just want to toughen me up. Where's my loving, kind Father, gentle Father? Instead, you're throwing me into difficulty and kind of abandoning me so that I'll be a tough, soldier for you. And I don't want that. I want to just be a son, a tender son. And you're just exposing me to all this hardship to make me tough for your kingdom. And I'm an expendable pawn to you. You just use me, and I'm expendable for you to accomplish your purposes. And so I was kind of feeling like Jeremiah. And what God said to Jeremiah is, Jeremiah, if you are wearied when you compete against men, how can you compete against horses? I don't know if you remember that verse. If you become weary when you are running against men, how will you run against horses? And when I heard that, I was I got angry, actually. I said, how can you not have compassion on me in my difficulties, because basically this verse is saying, God is saying, yes, I'm willing to toughen you up. And my reaction is, I don't want to compete against the horses. Why would I want to compete against horses? Why would I want to run against horses? But the truth is that sometimes we have to. Some of us are put in situations like that and are called into these difficult times when we have to compete against the horses. Do you understand what I'm saying? God used that metaphor. Something that is beyond us, beyond what we would normally do, beyond just competition against other people. Now it's running against the horses. And that, he's to prepare, sometimes he has to prepare some people for that. And the way that you're prepared for that is by building perseverance in difficult times. So I want to encourage you, as we go into a time of increased pressure for believers, that to press into perseverance and into faithfulness, because God is building something in us, because he has assignments for us. And this is where, my focus on assignments, thinking about assignments, coming from that prison time, I began to, from that song, the line I quoted, to really press into, God, I want to complete every assignment you have for me. I don't want a single one of them to remain, to fall to the ground. And I think God has assignments for us in this time of great darkness that is coming. So we prepare our hearts so that we can stand, so that we can carry out our assignments that he has for us. And he intends for us to stand. and he's building a toughness in us. He wants us to have the tender heart, but to have that conditioning and mentality and perseverance built up in us so that we can carry out difficult assignments. So I want to encourage you in that if you feel battered and just that you've gone through some very difficult times and not seen the face of God and not heard his voice, to press into this building of faithful perseverance, because God is preparing you so that you can compete against the horses. I want to mention one last thing so that we end on a very positive note. And that's that I mentioned before the issue about trust and it being tied often to a result. And I had a very hard time with trust. It's so important to God that we trust him. I had a hard time. What does this mean? What does it look like if I'm not tying it to any results? And so I had to think about it differently and to get my heart around it. And this is I want to share that with you, how I applied trust in my life in the dark. And I thought of it as leaning into Jesus. I can say, Jesus, I believe that you're a good leader. I trust that you're a good leader. I don't know what that will mean in my life. I don't know where you're going to take me. I don't know what the results of this imprisonment will be. I don't know if I'm going to be with my children and wife again. I don't know. But I will lean into your leadership. And that leaning is trust, leaning into him. 2 Timothy 4:18 became one of my favorite verses. And so Timothy's writing this, Paul is writing this in his last imprisonment. He was in a dungeon, he was miserable, not like when he was writing Philippians. This time he was in a dungeon, miserable and expecting to be executed. And so these are some of the last words that Paul wrote. He says, "The Lord will rescue me from every evil deed and bring me safely into his heavenly kingdom." So first, it should make us rethink what rescue and safety means. He's going to be executed. His head was cut off shortly after he wrote this. But I think what this really means is the Lord will rescue me from every evil deed and bring me safely into his heavenly kingdom, is that he will shepherd me through and bring me through. He's committed to taking me through to his kingdom. And that's really what we're aiming for. I think what Noreen and I want is, God, we just want to make it safely home with all of our children. If that happens, that will be so amazing. Kind of if our whole family will make it through to your kingdom. And I see, as I look back through all the darkness and the doubts and the questioning and the weakness, how he shepherded my heart, even when I had no sense of his presence or his voice. He's committed to shepherding my heart. Now, 2 weeks ago, I went into a very delicate surgery, came up suddenly on my spine, in my neck. And before this surgery, the doctors tell you, well, it's possible that you end up paralyzed. You can lose your voice. Your vocal cords can be damaged. You can end up with not being able to swallow anymore for the rest of your life. That's unlikely to happen, but these things can happen. You have to factor this in as you decide whether you're going to go into this surgery. So it's kind of scary. I'm thinking, okay, Jesus, I've been through prison. I've been through all that terrible time, darkness. Now I have something in front of me. I don't know what's going to happen. Now I have people praying for me, standing guard in prayer, so no darkness gets through in this surgery. But ultimately, I don't know what's going to happen. So what am I doing before I go into surgery? I'm leaning into you, Jesus. I'm leaning into your leadership. I don't know where you're going to take me. I don't know what's going to happen to me. I don't know what hardships are ahead of me. But I lean into your leadership and believe that you will shepherd my heart until you take me into your kingdom. So I want to leave that thought with you, that even as we talk about difficult times coming and the dangers, the danger of fear, of the offended heart, of, not persevering, all the things that I've talked about, is that we have a lion who is committed to taking us through. And I want to leave you with that encouragement. Lean into his leadership and into his shepherding of your heart.
Thank you for listening to this episode. If it inspired you, please rate us and subscribe on Apple or Google Podcasts, Spotify, or another podcast platform.